everyone in the diabetes community has an opinion on this. You should eat low carb. You should eat high fat. You should eat low fat.
I had a meal plan. I was eating a certain amount of carbs and a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of fat for every meal, and everything was very structured. That was the first time I got my A1C down to 5.7%. It wasn't good for a lot of other things. It wasn't very good for my mental health.
This diet is so amazing. It does things that you would not expect it to do. It's the best thing for my diabetes, and you should do it too.
Can you please stop what you're doing? Because this is clearly not working for you. It's messing up your blood sugars. It's messing up your insulin sensitivity.
Hey, I thought you had diabetes. Are you allowed to eat that? Hey everyone, welcome to the Diabetes Unlocked podcast. I'm Tom.
And I'm Christelle, and together we have over 60 years of experience living with type 1 diabetes.
In this episode, we'll be chatting about one of our favorite topics, food. We'll talk about what we like to eat and why, what specific diets we tried and how they impacted our blood sugar control, and we'll also share some practical tips and strategies that we like to use around food. Let's get into it.
I'm really excited about this conversation, Tom. To your point, I'm a big foodie, so I really enjoy food. It's also one of those topics that I feel like most people with diabetes talk about a lot because food is such a central part of managing blood sugars as well. I mean, you can't just talk about insulin. We have to talk about food as well, right? So I'd say for me personally, and I want to hear your perspective on this as well. I have worked with a lot of different medical professionals over the years. And it's fascinating. I've never been told that I had to follow a certain diet, which I kind of appreciate because I really believe that we're all different. But I actually have been told by my endo at one point, she's like, can you please stop what you're doing? Because this is clearly not working for you. It's messing up your blood sugars. It's messing up your insulin sensitivity. And that's the only time where I've been given like, you should probably not do this. Or she would never say that. She's like, hey, you might want to reconsider what you're doing because this is clearly not working for your body and it's making life really, really hard for you. I don't know, have I ever told you about this? Do you know which diet I'm talking about?
No, I was going to ask, what were you doing?
No, I want you to guess. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Okay. So you said something that's messing up with your insulin sensitivity. I guess from my experience, I tried different kinds of eating and different diets. And I guess everyone in the diabetes community has an opinion on this. Like some people will tell you, you should eat low carb. Some people say you should eat high carb. You should eat high fat. You should eat low fat. You should eat some meat, no meat, like only meat, carnivore. There's a lot of people who have like really strong perspective on this. But from my experience, my insulin sensitivity got worse, or I got more insulin resistant when I was eating more animal products and more just fat in general. So I would say it might have been like keto diet or something like that, where you get a lot of energy from fat and don't eat, too much carbs, let's say. So I guess that might have been the thing, but I honestly, I don't really know.
Bingo.
So what was it?
Bingo, bingo, bingo. No, you hit it right on the head. For me, unfortunately, high-fat diets doesn't really work. They make me super insulin resistant. And I think I want to start this episode also by saying I'm not telling anyone, and neither Tom, to eat a certain way. We're just sharing our experience. I really don't believe there's one way that's right for everyone. I also tried a lot of different things. So has Tom. So we'll get into that. I hope the takeaway from everyone who's listening is, hey, there's a lot of different things. You could try a lot of different things. Some things will work and some will not. And for me, a very high-fat diet just messes me up in so many ways, in the sense that, as I said, my insulin sensitivity tanked. That means that I needed a lot more insulin to manage my blood sugars. I might not see as many spikes because I wasn't eating as many carbohydrates, but just to sustain my blood sugar levels and not see them creep up, I needed significantly more insulin, which was, insulin isn't bad. You can definitely manage blood sugars with more insulin. It's just, it was way harder. And it showed up in my blood sugar reports. And that's why my doctor is like, hey, what are you doing? And this doesn't look like it's working for you. I also gained a lot of weight, which wasn't really my goal at that point. So yeah, I would say keto did not work out for me.
Yeah.
Is that something you've tried?
Well, I don't think I ever really tried keto, the real hardcore ketogenic diet. And I'm not no expert in I'm not a nutritionist. I have no education in that realm. But I guess my understanding is keto is like extremely low carb, where you eat, less than 20 grams of carbs per day. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I don't think I ever went that low for like an extended period of time. I ate low carb, and I guess that was the first way of eating that sort of worked for my blood sugar control. Like the first time my HbA1c got below 70%, I think that was when I was eating low carb. Like that was the first time when I really spent more time trying to manage my blood sugars better and get more time in range, better HbA1c. I think the first time I was successful was, I was paying attention to what I'm doing, but I was at the same time eating less carbs. And I think it sort of makes sense because for someone who is not that experienced, and that was definitely me back in the day, when you have less carbohydrates in your diet, you there is less room for error, I feel, when you count carbs, when you estimate carbs, when you don't know exactly how many carbs you eat. If there is less carbs, it's usually easier to estimate and get the insulin dose right compared to when you're eating a lot of carbs. Because when you eat 120 carbs in a meal and, you look at the plate and say, okay, this could be 80 carbs, it's really easy to miss, just get it wrong. But when it's 18 and you say, okay, maybe this is 15, then it's you don't make such a big mistake. And I think that's why it's easier for someone who is less experienced, which is me back then, to get a better control eating like lower carb diet as a, in a short term.
So when you say low carb, actually, let's define that a little bit in the sense that you said high carb would probably be like 120 grams of carbs in a meal or something like that. What What do you mean when you say low carb? What is that in a meal?
Like I look at it more like how many grams of carbs I eat per day. When I say low carb, it would be maybe less than 50, less than 60 carbs. Like my meal would be mainly protein and maybe a little bit of fat, and then a lot of like vegetables, those non-starchy vegetables, and maybe some legumes, things like that. So in the meal, I would eat a lot of vegetables, and then maybe some meat, some eggs, some legumes, beans, something like this. So there is still carbs in this. It's not ketogenic kind of meal, but it's, for me, that's what I call low carb, and I find it relatively easy to manage around these kind of meals, especially when I'm in a restaurant. I don't know exactly what's in that meal. It's sort of safer for me to estimate the carbs or even count the carbs when I can look at the label and count them with these sort of meals. If I eat, let's say half of the plate would be potatoes, or there would be 3 slices of bread, I would not call this low carb anymore. Or if there was a lot of pasta or rice, I would not call this low carb. So I guess that's how I look at it. But I guess is your interpretation similar to this, or do you look at this differently?
Low to medium carb for me means like 20, 30 grams of carbs per meal. So that's kind of how I think about it, which I guess falls more towards the low carb end of the spectrum. I don't remember what the American diet amount of carbs is. I think it's 260 a day or something. Let me just grabbing that out of the air. But if that's kind of average, 20 to 30, maybe even 40 grams of carbs per meal is definitely on the lower end of the spectrum, right? So
Yeah, definitely. When you think of the American diet or American standard diet or whatever it's called, it's a lot more than 20 to 30 per meal, definitely.
absolutely, absolutely. So that would be, I don't know, 70, 80 grams per meal, I think, something like that. I'd say I hardly ever, like on a regular basis, I don't eat that much in every meal. Definitely.
Mhm.
I just got used to not doing that. But hey, I kind of feel like I was skipping ahead here. I kind of want to hear your journey though. I want to know what you just mentioned that you've gone low carb. You tried a lot of different things. Also, you got diagnosed fairly early in life, right? So has it evolved? Kind of what were you told in the beginning? How were you told to eat, or were you not told anything? Or well, I guess your parents were told, but were
Yes.
there rules and have you broken them? Or how about you?
Definitely. I break all the rules in the world. I was diagnosed at the age of 3. I already said that in the previous episodes. So it was mostly my parents who were having these conversations with the doctor or maybe a nutritionist what I should eat and to when and how. What I remember, and that might have been later, a little bit later on, what I remember like today is we got this book that had pictures of different foods and there was always a picture of each food and how much of it is 1 unit. So back then the mindset was you eat 4 units for breakfast, and these units can be like you can exchange you can change up the items on your plate. So let's say 1 apple or like a small slice of bread would be 1 unit. And you can sort of like switch bread for apple or 2 apples for 1 banana. So I think about 12, maybe 15 grams of carbs would be 1 unit. The doctor told us, okay, you should eat 4 units for breakfast, 2 units for a morning snack at 10 o'clock, 4 or 5 units for lunch, and then another 2 units for afternoon snack, and then another 4 or 5 units for dinner, and another 2 before you go to bed. So, and then the insulin dose was sort of fine-tuned to those units of food. So I was taking 4 units of insulin and then eating 4 units of food. And that sort of worked in theory. We really stick to this when I was a small kid. But then later on, I think there was more variety and I was experimenting with a lot of different approaches. But when I go back to this time, I feel like this approach made a lot of sense because it brought a lot of like routine. Every day was sort of similar, and that approach was very carb sort of oriented. The insulin dose was designed to sort of cover certain amount of carbs. So in theory, I guess this should work. It was missing a lot of like other elements like exercise and protein and fat, because in these photos we had of the food, there was no meat, there was no eggs. These things just didn't count, right? So we were only counting the carbohydrates. But I know today that not only carbohydrates impact blood sugar, like fat and protein also have effects. And you experienced that with your ketogenic diet, that it impacted your insulin sensitivity. But I think that approach of like every day is in a way similar, same amount of carbs, same amount of insulin, it kind of worked for what we had back then. We didn't have a CGM, we didn't have a insulin pump, nothing like this, but this approach worked. But it was very strict. I couldn't just eat ice cream or pizza. We were told like things that have sugar I should not eat, or like as a special occasion I could, maybe for a birthday, okay, once a year. But we were told, okay, ice cream has too much sugar, you should not eat it. So that was the approach back then. But that was 35 years ago. So we have to put things into perspective. I don't think people are told this anymore.
I think there's still I think it's called the food exchange, which is kind of like 1 unit of food sort of is a block. It's a block of food. And then you take a certain amount of insulin with that. So I do think it's still a system. I hope it's not as restrictive as what you're mentioning, but I do agree that it gives some structure. And I also think there's something else that's really important in what you're saying is that you're talking about visuals. I think having those visuals, so you start to get a mental picture of, hey, what does 20 grams of carbs look like on a plate? Because we're not always going to be able to like measure things out or have a packaging that we can look at. I think one of the big things for me is once in a while, I do measure my food. I use a kitchen scale, and I often measure out food to gauge the carb count a little bit more accurately. I know for a lot of people, that's way too much work, and I get it. I just find that at least doing it once in a while, well, at least do it. Okay, so let's say, Tom, you tell me, hey, this is too much work, I don't want to do this. I'm like, that's cool. Try and do it like once a month. Just get out the kitchen scale, measure, your main meals out, your main carbs for just one day. I find that really resets, the mental picture of like what 20 grams of carbs look like on a plate. Because I find that drifts. I think this is for my US listeners, a good example is peanut butter. None of us know how to scoop out like a teaspoon of peanut butter. If we scoop it out with a teaspoon and then actually weigh it out, I bet you that it's not actually a teaspoon. It's more like a teaspoon plus and a half. Because we're, as humans, we're just not very good at estimating, volumes. So just doing that mental check once in a while. And that's regardless of diet, I'd say.
I mean, it's so funny because whenever I look up a recipe and the recipe is a US based author, from a US based author, you have these measurements like half a spoon of this, half a cup of that. And I'm like, this American approach is crazy. Like we just measure things in grams. It's like there is no different size. A gram is a gram. Like we don't do these spoons and tablespoons because everyone has different size. And so what I end up doing anyway, I always convert this into grams, or like I use a cup, but then I measure everything in the same cup, and it's probably wrong. But I find this approach so crazy. But don't mean to make fun of the American way of measuring things, but it's so funny because even the food labels, like I'm changing the topic here, but the food labels in the US are insane because when you want to calculate how many carbs or how much protein or fat you actually eat when you eat 3 cookies or 5 cookies, it's like a huge, like a 5th grade mathematical task to calculate that. It's not easy to do it at all. Here in Europe, we always have per 100 grams. So it's like so much easier because I feel like every packaging in the US has different portion size. So the portion size for one brand would be 2 cookies, the other brand would be 5 cookies, and you kind of need to recalculate that number of cookies into the portion size and then backtrack into how many you are actually eating, which I find is super challenging. How do you even do that?
Well, actually, it's a counter argument. Sometimes it's easier because if you have a packaged food, let's say like cookies, and you look at it and say, hey, a serving size is 3 cookies, it's already calculated how many carbs that is. Let's say that's 25 grams of carbs. So you'll know that if you eat 3 cookies, whereas in the European system, you would have to take out a cookie, you have to weigh it, and then divide it by the 100, and then multiply by 3. So I'd say there's pros and cons to both. It's just, whenever I'm in Europe, I have to reset my mindset to, hey, now I have to divide by 100 and figure out, because usually it's per 100 grams. And in the States, I have to look at the serving size and then calculate it. But you're right, it's just a little different, especially if you're not used to it.
So sorry, I took that conversation somewhere else. But you were talking about measuring the foods or putting the food on the scale from time to time to sort of have a good your eyeballs calibrated the amount of rice that I eat, like how much is it, how many carbs are these, and I don't do this very often. I feel like I should do this more. Sometimes I do these videos on YouTube where I compare different types of rice or different types of pasta and how they impact my blood sugar. When I do these videos, I always put everything on the scale, but that's like the only time I do it. When I actually eat something in real life, not for my video or for the test, I just put it on the plate and then I say, okay, this is whatever, 150 grams. So I just eyeball it, and sometimes I just see, okay, that was not, I didn't take enough insulin, was clearly more. So then I recalibrate like this in my head, but I should probably take the scale out more often. I think that would help.
Just once in a while, you're guesstimating. I love that phrase.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. We do that. I do that every time I'm in a restaurant eating out. I guesstimate. So yeah, no, I use my kitchen scale quite a bit. You can get some fairly inexpensive ones on Amazon. It doesn't have to be fancy. And I just find that it's super helpful specifically for accurate insulin dosing. Okay. So taking you back to your childhood again. So you said you had this system where you were basically allotted different sort of cart boxes. It's not a good way of saying it. Then what? When did you sort of go out on your own, or what did you decide to do?
I don't really remember a lot of details because when I was a kid, we were following this book. We knew, how much 1 apple, 1 exchangeable units, 1 slice of bread, 1 unit, one banana, 2 units, like a medium-sized potato, 1 unit. And we were sort of going with that and like saying, okay, how many units I should eat per meal. I believe when I was a teenager, I didn't really follow anything. I was just, playing it by ear and just taking some insulin, sort of estimating, but with no real good information to make a good estimate. But when I became more interested in like managing my blood sugar and increasing my time in range and doing all these kind of things, that's when I started counting carbs and that helped me a lot. And that's when I also started to do more of the low carb approach, because I noticed, okay, it's easier to count carbs when there's less of them. It's easier to estimate the carbs when it's less of them and get the insulin dose right. But as I progressed through my journey, I realized it's not only about carb counting for me. I also need to count other things. Like I need to look at how much protein I eat and how much fat I eat in a meal, which is like a higher level of understanding. And I'm not sure if we want to go into that rabbit hole or how deep we want to go into that. But I know that if I want to have perfect control, that I need to take insulin to cover for protein and fat content in the food that I eat, if you know what I mean. So that was my progression. I only looked at carbs first, and I think that's what everyone should start with, because it's the most significant component of the food, at least in the short term. And then, once you get a hold of that, then maybe protein and fat is another area to explore, which is a bit more complex, I think. How about you? How was your journey when you were diagnosed? What were you told to do?
I was told to just eat normally. I was diagnosed as 19, and back then I was still living in Denmark. This is where I was born and raised. I hadn't moved to the States yet. So I was in Denmark, and their approach was, hey, eat as you normally do. However, we want you to focus on high fiber foods, which is kind of like the standard for healthy eating now as well. And so it was a lot of rye bread. There was no restrictions on carbohydrates, but I was told to like, hey, limit sugary foods, again, high fiber foods, eat a lot of protein, eat a healthy diet. So they're very well balanced, and they're trying to force any sort of eating regime on me. I was very early on taught carb counting, what you're talking about. So carb counting, anyone who's not familiar, means that you dose your insulin based on how many carbohydrates you eat. So I have a carb ratio, which means how many carbs is 1 unit of insulin covering. And I take that into consideration. I do that calculation before I dose my insulin. So I learned that really early on. And then for a lot of years, I think like 15, 16 years, I was just eating like that. I didn't actually think a lot about diet. I think it's also one of the main reasons for that was I was not really tapped into any sort of diabetes community. I wasn't communicating with anyone else living with diabetes. So I didn't really know that a lot of people had, more regimented ways of eating. I was just like living my life and just happened to also be living with diabetes. And then the big change for me came in 2013, I think so. Okay, so that's 14 years after my diagnosis. 16 years after my diagnosis, now I can't do math. When I started competing in fitness competitions. So when I started like bodybuilding, I got hyper focused on food, because you have to, in order to build muscle, you have to fuel your body. So it wasn't from a diabetes perspective initially, but I had a meal plan. I was eating a certain amount of carbs and a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of fat for every meal, and everything was very structured. I think back to what you were talking about when you first started, notice that structure, it did a lot of good for me in the sense that it really taught me how does different foods impact my blood sugars? How does different quantities of different foods impact my blood sugars? And I wasn't eating low carb. I was eating fairly high carb. I think I was at 60 to 80 grams of carbs per meal because, again, I was first in a muscle building phase, and my coach was focused on me lifting heavy stuff and building big muscles. And you need to fuel for that. That was the first time I got my A1C down to 5.7%. And that was not the goal. But the reason why that happened was I was measuring every gram of rice. If I was eating sweet potato, everything that I was eating going on the scale first, so I could dose my insulin super accurately, right? I knew this is 32 grams of sweet potato, it's not 30, and adjust for that. So just that really structured, really hyper-focused approach meant that my diabetes management was doing really well. I mean, it wasn't good for a lot of other things. It wasn't very good for my mental health because I got so focused on food that my whole life, as my husband say, my whole life was sweet potatoes, chicken, and working out. And that's all I talked about, right? And it was not good. And I did end up with a really messed up view on food, also because it went from eating a lot of carbs and a lot of food to then I had to diet down for a competition. I had to get down to body fat under 10%. For a woman, that's not healthy. So please don't do that. It was for competition. It was being on stage. So that meant I went down to eating very, very little. My diabetes was still doing really well. My diabetes management, because I was still hyper focused, but
Mm-hmm.
I think food for anyone living with diabetes can really be a mental trigger because it does end up being so tightly associated with our blood sugars. Sure. That was my exercise journey, and that's kind of how I started to really figure out how different kinds of food impacted me.
I'd love to hear more about that, but I just want to go back really quickly because you said, if I hear you correctly, like the first time your HbA1c dropped to 5.7, which is basically like someone with no diabetes. So for type 1 diabetes, this is extremely good. You said that it was not your goal. You just kind of got there as a consequence of measuring everything you eat, every little piece of rice, and putting it on the scale and having very like tight structure, which makes a lot of sense because I see that also on myself. Like the more I measure things, the more I pay attention, the more structure I have, the easier it is to get to better HbA1c or time in range. But I think one thing that you also needed at that point to get to this was like for your insulin to carb ratio that you talked about, you needed to have the right information. Like you needed to know exactly what your insulin to carb ratio is, because it doesn't really help when you measure every single grain of rice if your carb to insulin ratio is not right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that can also change over time. It also changes with your insulin sensitivity. And given I was in competition mode, I was very active. So my insulin sensitivity was like through the roof. In the beginning, I worked a lot with my endocrinologist in adjusting my ratios. She worked with athletes before, so she was pretty, on top of that as well. And what that meant was I quickly learned how to do that myself. Also, because things change so quickly. So I completely self-manage now, adjust my rates whenever needed. Thing is, there's a few things that can go wrong to your point, right? You can either count your carbs incorrectly or miss them, or you can, not have the right ratios, the right information. So if you're measuring your foods, if you're doing the same things for a few days and you see that the insulin is still not quite covering the amount of carbs, then maybe your carb ratio isn't quite right. And it's a good thing to have a conversation with your doctor, say, hey, should I alter it? Or if I see this, what should I do? So that you don't have to wait 4 months or 3 months or however often you see your medical team.
Mm-hmm. And and I'm just curious, did you have to change your ratio? So during the time when you were like eating a lot and like bulking up before the competition, then you were eating a lot for a certain amount of time, and then you were basically eating very little to get to that 10% fat. What is it called?
Body fat.
Body fats. So did your ratio change between these two phases of like eating a lot and eating little, or did it like stay sort of the same? Did you have to adjust it a lot in that time?
It's a few days ago. I know I had to change my basal rate. So my background insulin, but that's also because basal rate is also associated with how big you are as a person. So as you shrink down, become a smaller person, you'll also need less insulin. Also, I would just have less carbohydrates in my system at all time, less stored in my muscles, in my liver, myself. So there was less for the liver to release into the bloodstream. So I needed less background insulin. I think my rates changed just a little bit, but it's minor. It wasn't a whole lot once everything was dialed in. Actually, there was one more component. So, the beginning, when I was bulking up, I didn't do as much cardio. So, later on, we added more cardio, which also kind of like changed the whole calculation a little bit. So, there was changes, and I was just adapting with my main focus just to, again, optimize my body's absorption of nutrition. So it just had that nice side benefit that my blood sugars are really tightly managed.
Right. And then, so you started talking about this did not really work for you in the long term because just the way you ate didn't really work for your mental health. Could you maybe talk a bit more about that?
Of course. For me, I found that being that structured and having a lot of off limits foods or, well, messing with my head in so many ways. I did not handle this in the healthiest of ways because what I did was once I was done with my competition, I moved on to other very restricted diets, such as the keto diet, which was actually the first one I tried right off the bat. And then I moved to extreme low carb. So I'm taking to very high level what I did. So first there was a competition diet, then there was a keto diet, then there was very, very, very low carb, but not keto. If that makes sense. Settled on what I call like a moderate diet. This works really well for my mindset. What it is I don't have a set amount of carbs I have to follow. I allow myself treats. I allow myself a burger and fries because that's something I really enjoy. And I allow myself ice cream, not every day, but it's something that I have whenever, I feel like it. So most days I eat a moderate to low carb diet, but it's not per design in the sense that it's not like I have to do this, but I allow myself to eat whatever I want as long as I have an overall healthy diet and as long as I pay attention to how much insulin I need for my meals. That works for me.
And this is what you are doing now as well.
That is what I'm doing now. Yeah, I tend to eat It's funny. I still, even though I don't restrict myself, I tend to fall into routines. I tend to eat the same thing for breakfast for like 2 months in a row, and then I get super tired of it. I switch it all up, and then I eat the same thing for breakfast for like 2 months more, and then I get super tired about it. So, and the same thing for lunch. Actually, my lunch is pretty much always the same, and my dinners are very fluid. I don't always eat dinner, so it's kind of one of those.
I think everyone wants to know what you eat for breakfast and lunch. Now that you said you like to eat the same thing, so I also want to know what do you eat for breakfast and lunch these days, Crystal?
So these days, I feel like I should be showing photos as well. I might have some, but these days
Evidence.
I'm very evidence. Exactly, I do have evidence. Also, we're both YouTubers, so of course we have like video footage of what we eat and all that good stuff. But yeah, right now I'm really into Ezekiel bread. So I did this whole video on different types of low carb bread, and I had done it like a review 100 years ago on the Diabetes Strong website, and I got introduced to Ezekiel bread, which I'm not sure you can get it outside the States really, but it's a sprouted bread, so there's no flour in it as such. So it's sprouted, it's low glycemic, it's nutty, it's really good. It's like 15 grams of carbs per slice. I eat that, get a slice of cheese, and then I eat eggs. So every day right now I get up and I make myself eggs.
Nice.
Yeah,
And
I try that.
lunch?
Lunch is super quick, super easy. I do big batches of chicken that I cook every 3 to 4 days. I bake them in the oven. I throw that in the fridge because that means for lunch, I just pull out a big salad. I throw chicken on it, and that is lunch. I used to buy like different types of greens, different types of cabbage, all the deal. I would chop everything up every day, and I just found everything got turned bad way too quickly. I couldn't eat it before it got bad. So now I buy these salad mixes. Again, don't know. You should be able to get those anywhere in the world, I think, which basically comes with the greens. It comes with a dressing, it comes with a little bit of croutons, whatever. And I usually have a bag of that with chicken, slam bang. Easy lunch.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. How about you? The same things?
No, not every day. I also had like my phases. We wanted to talk about different kinds of diet we tried. I think we haven't touched on it was I had a period of time about healthy or even more when I didn't eat any meat, and I was trying to really hack my insulin sensitivity or get as insulin sensitive as possible. And I was basically eating very low fat diet, a lot of whole foods and just a lot of carbs in general. It was a high carb, low fat diet. And we can talk about what it did, like how it changed my ratio and my insulin doses and everything. During that time, I had a breakfast that I ate every day. And that was basically a fruit bowl with a lot of fruit. I lived in Brazil back then. And so it was like mango, papaya, and if I was lucky to get some like strawberries and raspberries for that bowl with just chia seeds and Greek yogurt and maybe some oats sometimes. And I ate this every day. It was just so good. Sometimes I also added avocado, like just whatever of these fruits I had in the fridge, I put in there. And I just ate this every day. And it was what I liked the best, I think, about this way of eating, because I could eat so much fruit. And I figured out how to, how much insulin I need for that and that sort of thing. And I honestly, I ate this every day. And sometimes I still eat it, but I don't do it too often anymore, because I noticed when I don't follow that specific diet plan, this meal just has so much carbs and so high glycemic index carbs that it's kind of hard to deal with on like a normal average diet plan. So what I eat now more is actually I like to eat more protein than I used to. So I really like for lunch most of the time I go to like a Lebanese buffet, and they have like really good like mixes. Let's say peppers, bell peppers filled with meat. They have some like grilled chicken, and they have all kinds of cabbage, cauliflower, and chickpea, and all these kind of things that are actually quite healthy. And they have really good seasoning and everything like that. So I'm addicted to this place. I go there very often now. And the good thing about it is you can put everything on the scale. Actually, you have to put your plate on the scale when you're checking out, when you want to pay, because they have to measure how much it is. And then based on that, you pay, because you pay per 100 gram, of course. We are in Europe, right? So there is a price per 100 grams. So, and then I figured that I need about 1 unit of insulin for every like 100 grams of this mix that I put on the plate. So for me, it's like super easy to get my insulin dose right, because I don't know how many carbs there is exactly, or how much protein, but I just know for each, for 100 gram, how much insulin I need. So that's pretty cool. So that's what I do a lot these days.
Super nifty. That's really handy with having that scale here. I think most people don't want to bring like a kitchen scale to a restaurant. That's a little awkward. I mean, you can't. I actually found this tiny one it's kind of like the size of a phone. That one you could kind of brought it when I was traveling. But it's a little awkward to do in a restaurant. I think guesstimating is also good enough. I don't want to go back. Can we talk a little bit more about the high carb, low fat diet? Because I've read about it. The guys who kind of invented it. Oh, I don't want to say they invented it, but those who started to talk about it. And I think it's fascinating because it's one of those where they eat, 300 grams, 500 grams of carbs a day, very low fat. And because they minimize their fat intake, at least the claim is that the insulin sensitivity is so hypercharged that they actually don't need a whole lot of insulin for these excessive amount of carbs.
Yeah.
Is that your experience as well?
Yes. This diet is like so amazing in a way. It does things that you would not expect it to do. Because I think anyone who lives with type 1 who hasn't tried this wouldn't believe what I'm going to say, that it's true. Like when I made this video on YouTube, there are so many people who didn't believe, like simply didn't believe what I was saying was true. Like they thought I made it up. But it's true. I think we know those guys who sort of not invented it necessarily, but sort of like monetized it. They created a program where they teach people how to eat this way. And they have a great book. I actually read this book before I started doing this. I think in this whole food plant-based diet, you really try to minimize the fat to minimum, like eat very little fat and basically do not eat any meat. So most of the things you eat is fruits, vegetables, basically whole foods. It should not be processed at all. And Like a mixture of these things are really good for increasing insulin sensitivity. And it actually starts happening very fast. So when I went into this, I was jumped all the way in from like the normal way of eating. I jumped right away into whole food, plant-based, low-fat way of eating. And I was amazed. Like I was low all the time. So I basically, I ate my breakfast. I dosed insulin according to my insulin to carb ratio, which back then was, I think, 10. And 2 hours after breakfast, I would have a hypo. And so I ate a lot of carbs. In 2 hours, I would have a hypo again. So I had to like drastically reduce my background insulin to sort of keep up with how my blood sugar was dropping all the time. And I, at the same time, I had to take quite a lot of insulin before meal because I was eating so much carbs. So it was sort of tricky to figure things out. But I definitely, after eating this for 2 weeks, I was taking like half of the background insulin than before. And my insulin to carb ratio would move from 10 to maybe 18. So I needed a lot less insulin for the carbs. It's kind of weird if you hear it for the first time, but it is true. That's what happened. And that trend continued. After 2 weeks, it was a little bit slower, but it continued in that direction. So I ended up actually eating 400 grams of carbs a day, but taking less insulin than when I was eating 50 carbs, which is just doesn't make sense, but it's what it is. And I think really when you stop or eat very little fat, then these things can happen. I'm not saying this happens for everybody. I think everyone is different and things might happen faster or slower or differently for different people. But it was my experience been with this way of eating.
How did you stop?
So the main reason I stopped is it was extremely difficult to stick to it because I had to make my own food all the time. When you go to a restaurant, there is oil in everything, and there's like oftentimes you kind of see the meat on the plate and you kind of feel like eating it. So I felt like it's super challenging to eat out with this because there's so many things that fall in the red bucket, which you should not eat. So it's almost impossible to have a normal meal in a restaurant. And it's just tiring to make every food yourself when you travel. So what I did, I slowly incorporated certain things like eggs or fish into the diet. I felt like it didn't impact the insulin sensitivity much. But at some point, I just became a bit frustrated, like so many restrictions, and I think it started to mess up with my head a little bit. And then I took the things that were right for me from that way of eating, meaning eating a lot of whole foods, trying to avoid processed foods, not eating fried foods or anything like that, or just limit these things. But at the same time, I can go to a restaurant and like eat with others, like a meal from time to time, and I don't have to feel guilty that I'm not sticking to my super strict whole foods plant-based diet. But it was a good learning. I think it also taught me that how much of the effect protein and fat have on my blood sugar and the fiber, as you correctly noted, because when you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, there's a lot of fiber, and the fiber is like really good for blood sugar control, especially in the long term. I feel it's a great thing. So that's why I stopped. But I feel like I stuck to some of the things that I learned during that time.
The reason why I didn't try it was a lot of things that you said right now. I heard about the benefits of like, that's what caught my interest. And I was like, this is a different way of doing things. But what you said there's a lot of forbidden foods. So we had this whole forbidden thing that I've been down that road before. I was like, I'm not going there again. And it being very restrictive. And for me, it's just, I'm like, if that works for you and your personality and it doesn't affect your mental or your social life, then I would say go for it. Try it out. It is. So I think the words that the label to put on it, it's vegan. If you follow the really like strict regime, it's vegan, it's high carb, low fat. So that also means, for example, you might want to consider talking to a medical team about should you take any sort of supplementations and vitamins. Is there any like micronutrients that you might be missing out on if you're eating a diet that's very restrictive? And I think that goes for all the diets that we're talking about here. I'd say, unless your medical team has said, hey, you should not eat a certain way because you have other restrictions, or you maybe have to watch your I don't know, your sodium, whatever. You can try things out. Try them on for size, see if they work. And if they don't work, it's okay to skip them, move on, or do like Tom did and, you know, take out the pieces that work for him. Like me also for my competition diet, I still pulled out things that worked for me and I brought them with me and created my own little, way of eating that
Yeah,
I just
I
I
agree.
tend to get stuck in boxes and
Yeah.
it's not
I
always.
remember I had to supplement B12
Mhm.
and maybe something else like vitamin B12 I just couldn't get. So I had to supplement. And like there were other things that were actually really good about this way of eating. Like I felt very energized. Like I had a lot of energy compared to eating like low carb, eating high carb. Like you have the energy all the time. And when you don't, you just eat more. So I feel like I had a lot of energy and I was I was losing weight at the same time because there was not a lot of fat. I guess that helps with the weight loss. I don't know how, or don't ask me, but I lost a lot of weight. But then actually another thing that happened after 6 months of doing this, people were telling me, "Oh, you look really skinny. Something is wrong with you?" And I'm like, no. So when I started hearing this more often, I realized, okay, maybe I just need to start eating other things as well because I really lost like 10 kilo, which is a lot of weight for me. I have normally 71 kilos. So when I go to 61, it's like a big drop. And I was really skinny. Like when I look at my video about this way of eating, I was super skinny.
And that's the other thing is like I always hear how different diets are like the golden ticket for weight loss. But what it comes down to, remember how I said on the keto diet, I actually gained weight?
Mm,
And often it's advertised as one of those diets where you will lose weight because you're eating a lot of fat and fat saturates you, meaning you're not as hungry. Well, that's great. I can eat a lot of fat. And I did. And the thing is, any diet, if you're eating in a calorie surplus, and I'm simplifying here, but if you're eating more calories than you need to sustain your weight, you're going to gain weight. If you're eating less calories, you're going to lose weight. Yeah,
mm.
simplification, all the details would be for someone else in a different video. So also when you're eating only carbs, which was basically what you didn't really eat protein either, right? So it's mainly carbs. Yeah.
I did, but not much. I ate protein in things like beans, lentil. Like I ate some protein, but maybe, like 90% of the calories was coming from, or 80-90% was coming from carbs. And then the rest was mainly protein and maybe a little bit of fat, but
Yeah.
not
And just
much
to
of
take it
protein.
into sort of comparison. So high level gram of protein or a gram of carbohydrates are about 4 calories per gram, whereas a gram of fat has 9. So that also says that if you substitute 1-to-1 fat for carbs, then you're going to get less than half of the calories, right? So you have to eat a lot of carbs to like compensate for that. All right. Were you active as well? Were you exercising?
Actually, not much. I was sort of semi-active, but I did not exercise as regularly as I am now. Like now I have my routine. I go to the gym twice a week and I go for a run maybe once or twice a week. Back then it was okay. I went for a walk here and there, but I was not super active. Now I'm more diligent in this.
I was just thinking about when you say you have more energy because I remember going for runs
Mhm.
on very, very low carb diets. Oh my gosh, my feet would be heavy. It would be like, well, it would be a tough run. And then I would go after high carb days. So this is back also in my competition days. After high carb days, and I felt like I was flying because your body is energized, and
Mhm.
it's. I do think whatever you choose to eat has a huge impact on energy levels and just overall well being. But again, you need to find what's right for you.
Crystal, would you say there is a specific way of eating that makes your blood sugar management easier? Like, do you have something, if someone is struggling and I would ask you, what should I eat to improve my blood sugar control or make it easier for myself to manage my blood sugar or like increase time in range? Is there something you would like recommend? We're not giving like official medical advice, but something you would tell someone on I don't know, in an IG message, if somebody messaged you on Instagram. Because people ask me all the time, what should I eat to improve my blood sugar? I don't really know what to say. I mean, I have some tips, but what would you say?
Start with structure. I think rather than specifically what you eat, I would start with structure. Start eating the same thing just for 3, 4, 5 days. Usually 3 days is enough. Eat the same thing for breakfast. See how it impacts you. Figure out how to adjust your insulin for that meal. So yeah, start with structure. I do find that not eating right before bed can be really beneficial unless your blood sugar is trending low, of course. So that's more about timing. It's more about figuring out the right insulin dose, you know, for you at given times for different types of meals. I really don't believe there's one way of eating that's going to work optimally for all of us. And I obviously also have some baggage in the sense that very restrictive diets impacts me mentally, like in a really negative way. So I'll probably never be a spokesperson, so to say, for any of those diets. But I also know that they work really well for some people. So I'm not going to tell you that like you shouldn't do this. I'm just saying be careful. But yeah, I really don't think there's one way of doing things. I do think back to what I was told when I was diagnosed, you should go high fiber. High fiber is good not just for diabetes, but also for how everything works in the body. There's also some reduced cancer risk and stuff like that. So high fiber, I think a varied diet where you do get enough fats to sustain your body again, and also proteins are important.
Yeah.
So often my plates always have protein on them. So as I said, breakfast is eggs. One egg is not enough. So I eat 2 eggs and sometimes I'll have some egg white. Lunch, I always have chicken there. Also dinner is often some sort of protein, and then I built the rest of the meal around it. Not sure that answered your question.
No, but I think I didn't ask a very good question. I mean, there's not a good answer to this question because everyone is different and everyone is at different level of understanding how to dose insulin, how to count carbs, what is your insulin to carb ratio. And unless you know until you know all these details, it's really difficult to figure things out. But I think what you're saying is start with structure and maybe learning one meal by another, how to dose insulin for that meal while including those fiber and protein, which makes things easier in general from my experience, because then the blood sugar spike is not as steep when you throw some of these things in. I think that's actually a good response. I think one perspective I have on this is I learned with trying, low carb, trying high carb, low fat. I learned that my insulin needs can change a lot depending on how I eat. Regardless of, let's say I still have the same level of activity, but if I change the way I eat from like very high carb to very high fat, I will need different way of insulin dosing. Like I use an insulin pump. So I know that when I eat very little carbs, I eat low carb, I will need a lot of basal insulin from the pump. And I will need very little bolus because I don't eat a lot of carbs. I don't need to take too much of the pre-meal insulin, but I will need that insulin to cover for those fats and proteins that get released, that spike my blood sugar like later on and for a long time. On the other hand, when I ate high carb diet, I needed the dose of insulin before I ate the meal, and I needed quite a bit of it. But then my background insulin was like extremely low compared to when I ate high fat. So I think the distribution between pre-meal insulin, like bolus, and the basal from the pump can vary a lot depending how a person eats. And I know with an insulin pump, with an automated insulin delivery system that I have, it's actually very easy to be on a low carb diet, because the algorithm can step on the gas pedal with the insulin and give me more insulin when it sees that my blood sugar starts rising slowly from the protein or fat. It's usually like a slow rise, and the automated insulin delivery system can handle it most of the time. I don't even need to bolus. Sometimes I do, but I don't even need to bolus. But for carbs, when I eat carbs, the algorithm cannot handle it. I need to tell the pump I'm eating carbs, and give myself bolus manually. I think with MDI, with insulin pens that you are using, it's a bit different because you don't have that luxury of the algorithm correcting for those items. But I wonder how you do you see this in a similar way, or do you approach this in a similar way from how you think about it?
And I adjust as I mentioned before, I'm self-managed. So when I notice that, my choices, my life choices, let's say that my activity level, whatever I'm eating, is impacting my overall insulin sensitivity, I will adjust my background insulin, so my basal insulin to, you know, I'll adjust it for that. So for example, if I'm eating on the lower carb side, if I'm exercising more, I generally will need less background insulin and I have to lower that. So the way that I all the alarm bells are starting to sound is if I notice that I start to go high or low overnight, or if I notice that, especially in the afternoons between meals, that I start to go high or low, that tells me, hey, there's probably something off with my basal rate and I should adjust it. My rule of thumb is if this happens 2 to 3 days in a row, that's a trend. I need to act. If it happens once, it could be whatever. That's a one event is not a trend. That's just that could be a whatever. But it's interesting because yes, I do adjust it. But I think right now I'm so in a routine that there's not a lot of adjustments. And the other thing is from MDI for me, so multiple daily injections, my long acting insulin, it's a unit that I change. I either take 16. So right now I use Basiligar. I either take 16 units or sometimes when I'm very active, I have to lower to 15. It's 1 unit and it can make a huge difference. Like 1 unit for
Wow.
me can mean the difference between a whole night of low blood sugars and a night in range. So I am very on it because a whole night of low blood sugar, high blood sugars is really annoying. So there's another diet I actually kind of want to talk about because that's been very big, at least in sort of the community over here, and that's intermittent fasting. I don't know if you've done that, but intermittent fasting simply means that you don't eat for prolonged periods of time, like 8 to 12 hours, which I think most of us end up in anyway because we sleep. And most people hopefully get at least 7 hours of sleep. And we also need to get up and So I have done this like on and off. And the reason why I want to bring it up is that for me, it does not help with blood sugar management. So for me, it all depends on when I fast, but if I have my last meal at, let's say, 7 p.m. and I don't eat again until noon the next day, my body will go into completely savior mode in the sense that it will be releasing extreme amounts of glucose into my bloodstream in the morning to try and give me the energy to get my day started. I also become very insulin resistant. So that means, and this is completely normal biological response, the body releasing glucose into the bloodstream. That means that I have to go in very heavy with my rapid acting insulin in the morning to not see my blood sugar spike up to like 250, 300. So for me, for the most part, I'm like, this is not really worth it. I'd rather get up in the morning, have my breakfast, and sort of stop that insulin release. But I know other people who love intermittent fasting because they're like, the blood sugars are so smooth and they can sort of have a good start to the day. They're not really hungry, so they're not eating. And then they just, start their day and they're eating around noon.
Right. I have to say that I don't really follow intermittent fasting like intentionally. I don't do it. But what I do is, what I noticed is when I don't eat after dinner. So if I eat my dinner at 6, 7 p.m. and I don't eat after dinner, this is the best thing I can do for like a perfect overnight blood sugar. Also, if I don't eat breakfast, I will have perfect blood sugar throughout the morning. So for me, like the longer I don't eat, the longer I have a straight line. But you have to keep in mind, I have the AID, so the pump will, it's possible that my blood sugar kind of starts spiking in the morning the way you described, but the algorithm in the pump will handle it. It will sort of give me more insulin to cover for that. I also feel like I have a lot of energy. If I don't eat breakfast, my morning will be super productive and I will have good blood sugar. I don't do it every day. I don't do it intentionally, but I know it works. I understand how it might work for other people as well. I usually do it on days when I go to the gym. I just don't eat in the morning because then I have like more energy and I can lift a lot of weight, and everyone in the gym is looking at me like how strong I am and everything like that. But yeah, that was today. That's why I'm so confident. Anyway, I'm just kidding. So I don't do it intentionally, but sometimes I do that. And I thought when you said there is one more diet we need to talk about because a lot of people follow it, I thought you wanted to say carnivore diet, because whenever I make a video on YouTube about food, first comment is I eat carnivore diet and it's the best thing for my diabetes and you should do it too. Everybody should eat carnivore, only meat. What do you think about that, Crystal?
Okay, explain it first. So, what is it? So you only eat bacon and egg, no, not eggs, I guess. Bacon. No, you can eat eggs. I don't know. What do you eat?
I'm no expert in carnivore diet. I never tried, but my understanding is you eat mostly meat. You can also eat some other meat products like maybe bacon. I think people also eat eggs, but not too much, and things like butter, I believe. I might be wrong, so please take this with a grain of salt. But the main source of energy is meat. And I know one influencer that I follow who has a Crohn's disease, and going carnivore really helped him because he had big issues with his immune system and basically couldn't handle any vegetables or things like that, and he couldn't just live normal life. He had to take a lot of medication and was not able to function, and carnivore diet helped him to sort of get out of it. I don't know the mechanics, how it happened. I just know it worked for him. But when he makes these videos, he talks about it, but always makes a huge disclaimer, please don't do it unless it's like your last resort, because it has so many risks, because you're not getting a lot of things from other, a lot of nutrients from other sources that the body needs, that you need to supplement. But I just know a lot of people love to write comments about it. That's why I brought it up.
It's funny that you say that because I do get those as well on YouTube. I don't think anyone has ever like talked to me about the carnivore, so anyone in person that I've met, or I don't think anyone has mentioned it on Instagram either. It's actually only on YouTube, so I don't know if there's a hardcore carnivore community on YouTube. One of those that are super restrictive, so it's not something I would try. I'd be nervous about it. So they say it's high protein, high fat, I guess, if it's just like meat. Where do you get your fiber from? I mean, unless you're just like chucking salim husks all day, I don't know where you're getting your fiber from. I don't know if you ever tried that, but it's a fiber supplement. And
I don't know.
we'd be missing out on a lot of like the micronutrients, I guess. It also sounds like you might be a little constipated. There's a lot of things to unpack here. But again, it's one of those things. I was like, if you want to try, why not? Just talk to your medical team first. Make sure that you know that you don't have any underlying issues that might make this a really unhealthy choice for you. And if you have access to a registered dietitian, preferably somebody who knows diabetes, I would confer with them as well. Chat with them, say, hey, if I'm going to do this because I want to try it, what else should I be mindful of? I think that would be the best course of action. I don't know how it is in Europe, Tom, maybe, but here in the States, a lot of insurance, if you are associated with an endocrinologist's office, will also allow you to see a registered dietitian, either with a small copay or without a copay. So it might be something that's worth considering.
I've never talked to a registered dietitian, to be honest. I only watched some videos on the internet.
There.
Actually, some of the videos are from registered dietitians, but I'm not sure if this is a thing here in Switzerland specifically. Probably is, but I'm not sure if it's covered by insurance. And I don't want to sound too confident, but I feel like I did a lot of research in that area and a lot of testing of how different things impact my blood sugar. So from like blood sugar control perspective, I think I understand things very well. Not so much from the micronutrient perspective, or maybe I'm missing some. But yeah, maybe I should look into it, especially if it's covered by insurance. I pay so much to these guys. Maybe I should take advantage of it. But it's a good point.
If somebody's interested in finding one thing is start with your doctor's office. Also, there's a lot of good registered dietitians out there. It shouldn't just be a dietitian, a nutritionist. That's not a protected title. Registered dietitian is. So to be a registered dietitian, some of them don't know diabetes. I'm just saying. So I find that a really good source is if you, for example, use Instagram or if you use Google, then go in and do a search for registered dietitian, diabetes, type 1, type 2, LADA, whatever you live with, and then try to find someone who understands your condition and then preferably also takes insurance. That would be my 2 cents.
Okay. Perfect. I think one more topic we need to talk about are these, I'm sure you met someone before, like a friend or just some random person somewhere, like at a birthday party or someone who sort of found out that you have type 1 diabetes, and that person was asking you, let's say you were eating an ice cream because you said you like to eat ice cream. And I love ice cream as well. It's one of my guilty pleasures. And let's say that, you're eating your big, giant ice cream and that person comes, talks to you and says, hey, I thought you had diabetes. Are you allowed to eat that? Like, I think we need to talk about it. Like, first of all, I'm curious how you respond to this. And if it ever happened to you, like how you respond. And yeah, if like in general, I just want to touch on that topic because for me, it's super annoying when someone tells me this kind of thing.
No, I agree. That feeling of annoyance is the first thing that hits me. I can feel myself getting defensive. I do have like almost a rehearsed answer right now because it was last week. I had family visiting and someone who didn't grow up with me, or was asking because I was eating something. She's like, well, you can't really have that, can you? And the first reaction again is being defensive and getting really annoyed, like really core annoyance. And then I stopped myself realizing that for the most part, it's not said out of spite or because people are trying to, you know, be mean. It's said because out of ignorance, they don't know. So I often go into teacher mode and I was like, well, you know, I live with type 1 diabetes. I manage with insulin. Given I manage with insulin, there's actually nothing I can't eat. There might be things that are harder to manage from a diabetes, from an insulin perspective, but I choose to eat this and I choose to take them out of insulin. So I kind of get into the teacher mode and sometimes people glaze over because I talk too long. But for the most part, I try to turn it into a teaching moment. Then sometimes of course, I'm human, so I don't always succeed. Sometimes I'm just like, no, I can't. And then I move on. It depends on the person. What about you?
Right. I mean, I think I just don't know what to say. I usually get like sort of like I feel like tension in me, and I just like I'm really bad with like someone tells me what to do. I usually respond like very I'm usually very defensive. Like I just have something in me that whenever I feel someone wants to tell me what to do or what not to do, I will do the exact opposite. It's just it's not a preferred way to go, but it's like what you call it. It's the way I'm set up. I don't know how my brain functions. When somebody tells me go to the right, I'll go to the left. Like I don't know why, unless that person is like a natural authority for me, someone who I trust because that person sort of like deserves my trust because I follow him for a long time and I know it's like really knowledgeable or like really experienced or anything like that. But I guess an interesting thing on this topic is I often hear people say I can eat whatever I want, and I also don't like to say that much because I know, okay, I can eat whatever I want, but it's maybe not the best thing for me right now, always, right? I don't eat ice cream every time I want because sometimes I feel like, okay, maybe right now it's not the good time because my blood sugar is already, 250 or 300. Of course, I can eat it. Like I can do whatever I want. I can do even worse things than that, but I like maybe it's not the right time to do it right now. I also don't like when we say like we can eat whatever we want because it sort of introduces this mindset like we really can do whatever you want, which we can, but anybody can do whatever they want. And I could also ask that question to someone else, like, should you eat that? Should you eat that ice cream? Like in theory, nobody really should eat ice cream. Like it's not good for anybody. Even if you're healthy, ice cream is not good for you, right? You don't have diabetes, but you should not eat ice cream. But of course you can eat whatever you want. And I like to look at it from the, like, we're sort of I like to look at it like equally with anyone else. Like, nobody should drink beer. Nobody should eat ice cream. Nobody should smoke cigarettes. But, you know, people with diabetes can do it just like anyone else. It's just maybe sometimes it's a better time to do it. And it's, right now it fits better into my day or blood sugar management strategy or whatnot. And sometimes maybe I just wait an hour and I eat it in an hour because it's not the best time. So I don't know. I guess I'm taking this conversation somewhere else, but I hope it's making sense what I'm trying to say. I don't like to make differences between people with diabetes and without, because at the end of the day we're all human, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it comes down to semantics as well, right? What I'm hearing you say as well is there some certain words that triggers you because you cannot have people say they can't do things. I don't say I disagree that we shouldn't eat ice cream. I think ice cream brings joy. And I think a lot of food, for me at least, eating is not just about fuel. It's also about joy. And for me, it brings a lot of joy to my life. I know that's not the case for everyone, but if you're like me and food brings you joy, flavors bring you joy, textures bring you joy, it's worth including that into your life. But it is choice. I choose to eat this. Not because sometimes it's because I have to because my blood sugar is low. But, I generally choose to eat things and I choose not to eat things. But you're right. It's about explaining to people that, hey, I can do the same things as you. I do have more considerations I have to take into, more things I have to take into consideration because I do have to manage my blood sugars on my own. I don't have a body that takes care of it for me. But again, when people ask, for the most part, they don't have a negative or a sinister agenda. I have people who have asked in a way that I didn't think warranted an answer because it was so rude, but that's something else, right? And that's just rude people. I don't really engage with them.
Yeah. No, I think you nailed it. First of all, people probably almost never have bad intention when they ask something like this. Maybe never, like none of them do. And when something brings you joy, you should absolutely do it. I think you nailed that. Like, if ice cream brings you joy right now, you choose to eat it right now, then absolutely, that's what I do as well. And I think that's important. I love to eat, so I love to eat good food. So when I oftentimes do something, okay, it's not the best for my blood sugar, but at this point it brings me some sort of happiness, and maybe I choose time in happiness, not time in range, in the next couple hours. So I think you nailed that.
Put that on a t-shirt. We have to put that on a t-shirt. I love that.
No, I can't
You know, not
because
time for
I stole it from Nerd Diabetic. He came up with this term, time in happiness.
Okay, he
Credits
has to
to
put it
Nerd
on a
Diabetic.
t-shirt. Dang it. Okay. Well, I think this has been a really, really good conversation, Tom. Is there anything else that you feel like we need to pull into the conversation?
I can't think of anything else right now. I think we covered a lot of interesting topics, and I hope people will like it. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to this episode of Diabetes Unlocked. And we hope that our chat gave you some helpful insights. And as always, we love to hear from you. So if you have any thoughts on any of the topics we talked about, please let us know in the comments. Let us know what you like to eat. What's your favorite food? We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to our channel, and we will see you in the next one. Ciao.
Bye.